The sun beat down on Redemption Gulch like a punishment from an indifferent sky, turning the main street into a ribbon of baked earth that cracked underfoot. Mara Vance stood on the wooden platform in the town square, her wrists bound loosely with rope that had probably seen better days tethering livestock. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd stopped crying about an hour ago. Tears required hope, and hope had packed its bags somewhere around the time Dutch Holloway had announced her auction to the gathering crowd like he was selling prize cattle. Dutch stood beside her now, his belly straining against a vest that had given up the fight years ago, his face flushed red from the heat and the self-importance that seemed to radiate off him like steam. He was talking, always talking, his voice carrying across the square with the practiced boom of a man who loved the sound of his own authority. "Now I know what you're all thinking," Dutch said, gesturing broadly to the crowd that had gathered. Maybe 30 people, some curious, some bored, most just looking for entertainment on a slow Thursday afternoon. "You're thinking, Dutch, why go to all this trouble? And I'll tell you why." He turned to Mara, and she forced herself to keep her eyes forward, fixed on a point somewhere above the crowd's heads. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. "This here is about principle," Dutch continued, his tone turning sanctimonious. "Miss Vance's father, rest his troubled soul, he owed me money, a lot of money. And when he up and died, well, that debt didn't just disappear into the wind, now did it?" A few murmurs from the crowd. Someone coughed. Mara's jaw tightened. "Now, I'm a reasonable man," Dutch went on, which was the kind of thing only unreasonable men ever said. "I gave her time. Lord knows I gave her time. 6 months to come up with something, anything. But what does she do? Nothing, not a cent. So we come to this." He gestured to Mara like she was evidence in a trial. She was 22 years old, tall for a woman, taller than Dutch, which had always seemed to irritate him, with dark hair that hung in a braid down her back and a frame that her mother had once called sturdy. The other kids had just called her big girl, until she'd stopped going to school altogether. "The debt stands at $473, Dutch announced, plus interest, which brings us to an even $600. Now, I'm offering an opportunity here. Someone pays that debt, and Miss Vance here, well, she works it off. Honest labor, room and board, a fair arrangement." "You mean indentured servitude?" someone called from the crowd. Mara couldn't see who. Dutch's smile didn't waver. "I mean a second chance, which is more than some folks deserve." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Mara had known most of these people her whole life. Mrs. Chen from the general store, who used to slip her peppermint sticks when she was little. Thomas Wade, who'd asked her to dance once at a barn raising before his friends had laughed him out of it. The Barlow brothers, who'd never missed a chance to make her life harder. None of them were stepping forward. "Come now," Dutch pressed, his voice taking on a wheeling tone. "Strong back this one. Not afraid of hard work. Could help with a ranch, a farm. Think of it as hiring help without the monthly wage." "She's built like a draft horse," one of the Barlow brothers called out, and several people laughed. Mara felt the heat rise in her face, hated herself for it. Dutch laughed too, not unkindly, which somehow made it worse. "Well, there you go, honest assessment. What do you say, gentlemen? Do I hear a starting bid?" Silence. Mara's hands were shaking now, and she clenched them into fists. The rope bit into her wrists. She could feel sweat running down her back, soaking into the plain cotton dress that had been her mother's. It was too small in the shoulders, too tight across the chest, and she'd mended it so many times the original color was hard to determine. "Nobody?" Dutch's voice had an edge now. "Come on, folks. I've got all day, but Miss Vance here, well, the sun's not getting any cooler, is it?" More laughter. Mara wanted to disappear. She wanted to sink through the boards of the platform and into the earth and never come back up. "Tell you what," Dutch said, stepping closer to her. She could smell the whiskey on his breath, mixed with something sweet and rotten. "How about we sweeten the deal? Whoever takes on this debt gets a girl who can cook, clean, and keep her mouth shut. Ain't that right, Mara?" He grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at him. His fingers were damp and soft. "I asked you a question." Mara pulled her face away. "Don't touch me." The crowd went quiet. Dutch's expression darkened. "Now that's exactly the kind of attitude I'm talking about," he said, his voice still light but with something cold underneath. "See, this is why we're here. Pride. The Vance family always did have too much pride for their station. My father was a good man, Mara said, and her voice came out stronger than she expected. Your father was a drunk who couldn't keep a job and borrowed money he couldn't pay back, Dutch snapped. And now here you are, standing on this platform because you're too proud to admit you need help, too stubborn to accept charity when it was offered. You never offered charity, Mara said. You offered a room in your house and conditions I wouldn't accept. Dutch's face went red. Careful, girl. What conditions? Someone in the crowd asked. Nothing improper, Dutch said quickly. Just honest work. But Miss Vance here, she's got ideas above her situation. Thinks she's too good for... I think I'd rather starve than spend one night under your roof, Mara interrupted. And she was surprised by how calm she sounded. And I think everyone here knows why. The crowd shifted again, uncomfortable now. Dutch's reputation with women wasn't exactly a secret, but naming it out loud was different, dangerous. Dutch stepped back, his hands raised in a gesture of wounded innocence. Well, there you have it, folks. Slander from someone who can't even pay her debts. You all heard it. He turned back to Mara, and his voice dropped low enough that only she could hear. You just made this a lot worse for yourself. Worse than being auctioned off like livestock? You have no idea. He turned back to the crowd, his showman's smile returning. $100? He called out. Let's start there. $100, and she's yours. Anyone? Silence. 50 then. Come on, folks, $50 for years of labor. That's 600, a voice said. The crowd parted like water, and Mara looked up. The man who stepped forward was tall, probably in his mid-30s, with dark hair that needed cutting and a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile sometime around childhood. He wore work clothes, denim pants, a cotton shirt faded from too many washings, boots that had seen serious miles. His hands were scarred, his jaw hadn't seen a razor in days, and his eyes were the color of slate in winter. He also had a Colt .45 on his hip, worn with the ease of someone who knew how to use it. The crowd went quiet. I'm sorry, what? Dutch said. 600, the man repeated. His voice was low, rough, like he didn't use it often. That's the amount, right? Dutch's mouth worked for a moment. Well, yes, but cash or bank draft? The man was already pulling a leather wallet from his back pocket. Cash is fine, but hold on now. Dutch was flustered, his rhythm thrown. I don't even know you. What's your name? Rowan Cade. The man counted out bills with the kind of careful attention that suggested he didn't part with money lightly. I've got a ranch about 15 miles north. Been here about 3 years. I know the place, someone in the crowd said. The old Ketterman property. Rowan didn't respond, just kept counting. When he reached 600, he held the stack out to Dutch. Dutch didn't take it immediately. Now, Mr. Cade, I appreciate the offer, but I need to make sure you understand the terms. This is a debt arrangement. She'd be working off what's owed. There are expectations. She works, eats, has a place to sleep. Debt gets paid down monthly based on fair labor value. Rowan's eyes didn't leave Dutch's face. Anything beyond that? The question hung in the air like a challenge. No, Dutch said after a moment. Nothing beyond that. Then we're clear. Rowan pushed the money forward. Dutch took it, counted it twice, then looked at Mara like he'd just lost something he'd been looking forward to. Well then, I suppose we're done here. He reached for the rope around Mara's wrists, but Rowan was faster. He stepped up onto the platform, pulled a knife from his belt, and cut the rope with one quick movement. The crowd murmured. She can walk on her own, Rowan said. Mara rubbed her wrists, staring at the stranger who'd just bought her freedom with the same expression he'd use buying a horse. He wasn't looking at her now, just folding the knife and returning it to his belt. You've got yourself a worker, Mr. Cade, Dutch said, his voice oily. I'm sure you'll find her adequate. I'm sure I will. Rowan stepped down from the platform, then paused and looked back at Mara. You coming? It wasn't really a question. Mara glanced at the crowd, at Dutch's red face, at the Barlow brothers who were whispering and snickering. She thought about running. She thought about fighting. She thought about everything that had led to this moment. Then she stepped down from the platform and followed Rowan Cade through the parting crowd. Nobody said goodbye. The wagon was old but well-maintained, pulled by two horses that looked like they actually got fed regularly. Rowan didn't offer to help Mara up. He just climbed into the driver's seat and waited while she pulled herself up to the bench beside him. He snapped the reins, and they started moving. They left Redemption Gulch behind without a word, the town shrinking in the distance until it was just a smudge of buildings against the endless brown landscape. Mara watched it disappear and felt nothing. No sadness, no relief, just a kind of hollow exhaustion. After about 20 minutes, Rowan spoke. "You have anything you need to collect? Belongings?" No. Everything she owned had been sold weeks ago to try to pay down the debt. Everything except her mother's dress and a photograph that Dutch had taken as collateral. Family? Dead. Friends? Mara almost laughed. No. Rowan nodded like this was exactly the answer he'd expected. Ranch is about 2 hours from here. You'll have your own room in the main house. I mostly sleep in the barn anyway. Why? He glanced at her, the first time he'd really looked at her since they left town. Why what? Why did you do this? You don't know me. Rowan turned his attention back to the horses. Needed help on the ranch. You could have hired someone, normal way, posted a notice. Could have. But you didn't. Silence. Mara studied him, the hard set of his jaw, the way his shoulders stayed tense, even though they were alone on an empty road. You know what Dutch is. I know what men like him are. So this was, what, charity? No. Rowan's voice was flat. Like I said, needed help. For $600, you could have hired help for years. Money's just money. That's what rich people say. I'm not rich. He was quiet for a moment. But I'm not poor either. Not anymore. The wagon rolled on. The landscape was harsh here, mostly scrub brush and rocky soil, with mountains visible in the distance like broken teeth against the sky. It was the kind of country that didn't forgive mistakes. What happened to the last person who worked for you? Mara asked. Rowan's hands tightened on the reins. No one's worked for me before. Then how do you manage a whole ranch by yourself? Carefully. Mara wanted to push, but something in his posture warned her off. They rode in silence for a while, the sun beginning its long descent toward the horizon. I don't owe you anything beyond labor, she said finally, just so we're clear. I know. And I won't tolerate. You made your boundaries clear back there, Rowan interrupted. I heard you. Whole town heard you. Mara felt her face heat again. That wasn't about you. I know that too. More silence. Mara wasn't used to people who didn't fill every gap with words. It was unsettling. What kind of work? She asked. Whatever needs doing, cooking, cleaning, mending, garden needs tending, chickens need feeding, fence lines need checking. He paused. You know anything about cattle? No. You'll learn. What if I'm bad at it? Then you'll get better. The simple certainty in his voice surprised her. You don't know if I'm lazy. Could be I'm terrible at everything. Could be. Rowan glanced at her again. But I don't think so. Why not? You're still breathing, aren't you? Still standing. After everything Dutch put you through, you didn't break. That says something. Mara looked away, unexpected emotion tightening her throat. She'd been called a lot of things in her life. Too big, too proud, too difficult. But nobody had ever called her strong. Don't mistake survival for strength, she said. What's the difference? She didn't have an answer for that. The ranch appeared as the sun was setting, casting everything in shades of gold and shadow. It was smaller than Mara had expected. A main house that looked sturdy but plain. A barn that had seen better days. A few outbuildings scattered around like afterthoughts. There was a corral with several horses, and beyond that, open range that stretched toward the mountains. It was isolated, completely, utterly isolated. Rowan pulled the wagon up to the house and climbed down. I'll show you inside. The house was clean but sparse. Wood floors worn smooth from use, simple furniture that looked handmade, windows with real glass. There was a kitchen with a cast iron stove, a main room with a fireplace, and 2 bedrooms. That one's yours, Rowan said, pointing to the smaller room. Bedding's fresh. Lamps got oil. Mara looked inside. The room was tiny, barely big enough for the narrow bed and small dresser it contained, but it was clean, and the window had a view of the mountains. Bathrooms out back, Rowan continued. Indoor pump in the kitchen for water. You'll need to keep the stove fed if you want hot water for washing. He showed her where things were kept, food in the pantry, wood for the stove, tools in a shed. He spoke in short, clipped sentences like he was checking items off a list. Questions? He asked finally. Mara had about 1,000, but she settled on the practical one. When do I start? Tomorrow soon enough. Tonight, get settled. He paused at the door. You can lock this if you want. From the inside. I won't bother you. Where will you be? Barn, like I said. Why do you sleep in the barn? Rowan was quiet for a long moment. Easier that way. Easier than what? But he was already walking away, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. The door closed behind him, and Mara heard his footsteps crossing the yard. She stood in the middle of the small house, this stranger's property that was somehow supposed to be her home now, and tried to figure out what she was supposed to feel. Relief? Fear? Gratitude? She felt none of those things. Just tired. Bone deep, soul-crushing, tired. Mara walked to her small room and sat on the bed. The mattress was thin, but better than the floor she'd been sleeping on for the past month. She lay back, still wearing her mother's mended dress, and stared at the ceiling. Outside, she could hear the wind picking up, the distant sound of horses moving in the corral, the creak of the barn door. She didn't cry. She didn't pray. She just closed her eyes and let the exhaustion pull her under, wondering what fresh hell tomorrow would bring. Mara woke to darkness and the smell of coffee. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it came back. The auction, the stranger, the ride to the ranch. She sat up, disoriented, and saw pale light starting to show through the window. Dawn. The smell of coffee was real, coming from the kitchen. She got up, smoothed down her dress, and walked out of the bedroom. Rowan was standing at the stove, still wearing yesterday's clothes. He'd made coffee in a battered pot and was drinking it black from a tin cup. There's more if you want, he said without turning around. Mara found another cup and poured herself some. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, but it was hot and it was real. She'd been drinking chicory and burnt grain for months. They stood in silence, drinking coffee as the sun started to rise. It should have been awkward, but somehow it wasn't. Rowan seemed as comfortable with silence as most people were with conversation. You sleep? He asked finally. Some. You? Enough. He finished his coffee and set the cup down. I'll show you around, then you can decide what needs doing first. The tour didn't take long. The ranch was small, about 150 acres, with maybe 30 head of cattle. The barn needed repairs, the garden was mostly weeds, and the chickens were running half wild. Previous owner let it go, Rowan said as they walked the fence line. Died about 3 years back. No heirs. I bought it cheap from the bank. How cheap? Cheap enough that I knew I was buying work, not a working ranch. Mara could see it now. The sagging fence posts, the missing shingles on the barn roof, the corral gate that hung crooked. It wasn't neglect exactly, just the slow decay of a place that had been too much for one person to maintain. Where'd you come from before this? She asked. Rowan's expression closed off. East. That's specific. It's enough. They walked in silence for a while. Mara was starting to recognize his tells, the way his jaw tightened when a question got too close to something he didn't want to discuss, the way his eyes would fix on the horizon like he was looking for something that wasn't there. Why here? She asked. Why this ranch in the middle of nowhere? Rowan stopped walking and looked at her. Same reason you didn't fight harder on that platform. Sometimes nowhere is exactly where you need to be. The answer caught her off guard. She'd expected deflection, maybe anger, not understanding. I fought plenty, she said. I know. He started walking again. I was there. For how long? Long enough. Mara wanted to ask more, but something stopped her. Maybe it was the set of his shoulders or the way his hand drifted unconsciously toward the gun on his hip. This was a man carrying weight she couldn't see. They finished the tour back at the house. Rowan pointed out the various tools: hoe, rake, hammer, saw. Use what you need, just put it back when you're done. Okay. I'll be working the cattle today. You can start with whatever makes sense to you. He walked toward the barn, then paused and looked back. Mara. It was the first time he'd said her name. Yeah? You try to run, I won't stop you. But there's nothing for 15 miles in any direction except empty land and sun, just so you know. I'm not going to run. Okay. He nodded. But if you do, take water. Then he was gone, and Mara was alone with a ranch that needed more work than one person could possibly do, and a man who seemed determined to do it anyway. She looked around, at the overgrown garden, the wild chickens, the sagging fence. She thought about that platform in Redemption Gulch, about Dutch's hands on her face, about the crowd that had watched and done nothing. Then she walked to the shed, found a hoe, and started with the garden. Ciao. The first week passed in a blur of work and silence. Mara discovered that Rowan hadn't been exaggerating. There was more work than daylight hours. She started with the garden, clearing weeds and rocks until her hands blistered and bled. She didn't ask for gloves. She wrapped her hands in cloth and kept going. The chickens were next. They'd gone feral, roosting in trees and under the barn. It took her 3 days to coax them back into the coop Rowan had built. She fixed the broken boards, reinforced the wire, and started collecting eggs that were hidden in every conceivable corner of the property. Rowan worked from dawn until dark, riding out to check cattle, mending fence, hauling water. He'd come back covered in dust and sweat, eat whatever Mara had cooked in silence, and disappear into the barn. They barely spoke. But Mara was learning him anyway, learning the rhythm of his days, the way he moved with an efficiency that came from years of hard labor, the careful distance he maintained. He never stood too close, never touched her, even accidentally. It was like he'd drawn an invisible line around himself that he wouldn't cross. She should have been grateful. She was grateful. But it also made her curious. On the 8th day, she worked up the nerve to ask. They were eating dinner, beans and cornbread she'd made from supplies in the pantry. Rowan was shoveling food into his mouth like fuel, not even tasting it. "Why do you sleep in the barn?" Mara asked. Rowan paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. "Told you, easier." "That's not an answer." He set the fork down. "It's the only answer you're getting." Mara stopped, frustrated. "I'm trying to understand." "Why?" "Because I live here now. Because I need to know if I should be worried." Rowan looked at her directly then, and she was struck again by how old his eyes looked, like he'd lived several lifetimes already and hadn't enjoyed any of them. "You don't need to be worried about me," he said quietly. "I keep my word. You work, you stay, you sleep in that room without anyone bothering you. That's it." "Then why—" "Because I don't sleep well," he interrupted, his voice harder now. "Because I have dreams I don't want you hearing. Because it's better for both of us if I stay out there. Is that clear enough?" Mara sat back, surprised by the sudden intensity. "Okay." Rowan stood, his meal half finished. "I'll be in the barn." He left, and Mara sat alone in the kitchen, listening to his footsteps fade away. Dreams he didn't want her hearing. What kind of dreams? She cleaned up the dishes, thinking. There was a story there, buried under all that silence and distance. A reason a capable man would buy an abandoned ranch in the middle of nowhere and work himself to exhaustion every single day. A reason he'd pay $600 for a stranger's freedom without blinking. Mara dried the last dish and looked out the window toward the barn. A light was on inside. She could see it through the cracks in the boards. She should leave it alone. Mind her own business. Work off her debt and get on with her life. But she'd never been good at leaving things alone. The answer came 2 weeks later, in the middle of the night. Mara woke to screaming. She jolted upright, heart pounding, trying to locate the sound. It was coming from outside, from the barn. A man's voice, raw with terror or pain or both. She was out of bed and running before she could think about it, not even stopping for shoes. The yard was lit by moonlight, cool dirt beneath her feet. The screaming had stopped, but she could hear other sounds now. Breaking wood, heavy breathing, movement. The barn door was partially open. Mara pushed through it. Rowan was on his knees in the middle of the barn floor, shaking. He'd knocked over a lantern. It lay on its side, still burning, casting wild shadows. His face was slick with sweat, his hands fisted in his hair. He was gasping for air like he'd been running. "Rowan," Mara said. He looked up, and she saw it. Absolute terror in his eyes. Not at her. at something only he could see. "You're okay," she said, keeping her voice calm. "You're at the ranch. It's nighttime. You're safe." He stared at her like he didn't recognize her. Then, slowly, awareness came back. He looked around the barn, at the overturned lantern, at his own shaking hands. "Christ," he muttered. Mara moved carefully, like approaching a spooked horse. She picked up the lantern and set it upright. "How often does this happen?" Rowan didn't answer. He was still breathing hard, his whole body rigid. "Every night?" "Most nights." His voice was rough, scraped raw. "What do you dream about?" He looked at her then, and the expression on his face made her chest hurt. "Things I can't take back." Mara sat down on the barn floor, a few feet away from him, close enough to talk, far enough to not crowd. "You want to tell me about it?" "No." "Okay." They sat in silence. Gradually, Rowan's breathing slowed, his hands unclenched. The terror in his eyes faded to something duller, more familiar. Resignation, maybe. Or just exhaustion. "I had a family," he said finally. "A wife, a daughter, 5 years old." Mara's stomach dropped. Had. Past tense. "We lived east of here. Kansas, had a small farm. Nothing fancy, but it was ours." He was staring at the barn wall, not seeing it. There was a drought, then the bank came. Then he stopped. "Then what?" "Then men came who wanted what we had. And I wasn't fast enough. Wasn't careful enough." His voice was completely flat now, stripped of emotion. "They burned the house with my family inside. Made me watch. Then they left me alive to think about it." Mara felt ice in her veins. "How long ago?" 3 years? Give or take. 3 years. The same amount of time he'd been here, working himself into the ground every day, sleeping in a barn because the nightmares wouldn't let him rest. "Did they catch who did it?" she asked. "No." "Did you?" Rowan looked at her and something flickered across his face. "I'm not having this conversation." "Okay. I told you because you asked, because you deserve to know why things are the way they are here." He stood, his movement stiff. "But I'm not. I can't." "I understand," Mara said. "Do you?" "I understand that you're carrying something too heavy to put down. I understand that you bought my freedom because you recognize what helplessness looks like. I understand that you work yourself to death every day because it's easier than thinking." Rowan stared at her. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone doing the same thing." The comment caught him off guard. He opened his mouth, closed it again. "Finally. Your father. What really happened?" Mara hadn't talked about it to anyone, hadn't wanted to, but fair was fair. "He started drinking after my mother died. Got worse and worse, lost his job, borrowed money from Dutch, kept borrowing. I tried to help, but..." She shrugged. "You can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. One morning I found him in the barn. Rope. Chair kicked over. I'm sorry. Everyone says that. Nobody means it." "I mean it," Rowan said quietly. Mara believed him. "Dutch used the suicide as an excuse. Said my father was a coward who ran from his debts. Said I was responsible for paying them back since I was the only family left. The law agreed with him. The law's an ass. The law's whatever men like Dutch want it to be." They looked at each other across the barn. Two people who'd lost everything and ended up here, in the middle of nowhere, trying to figure out how to keep breathing. "Thank you," Mara said, "for telling me." Rowan nodded. "You should go back inside. It's cold." She stood, brushing hay off her nightgown. At the door, she paused. "The nightmares. Do they get better?" "No." "Then why keep going?" He was quiet for a long time. "Haven't figured out a good reason to stop yet." It wasn't hope. It wasn't even optimism. It was just stubborn, grinding persistence, the same thing that had kept Mara standing on that platform instead of collapsing. "Well," she said, "if you figure out a reason, let me know. Could use one myself." She left him there and walked back to the house. Above her, the stars were indifferent and cold, scattered across the sky like broken glass. Inside, she lay back down in her narrow bed and listened to the silence of the ranch. Somewhere out there, Rowan was probably still sitting in that barn, staring at nothing. And for the first time since the auction, Mara didn't feel quite so alone. The morning after Rowan's nightmare, Mara found him already working when she came outside. He was replacing boards on the corral fence, moving with the kind of focused intensity that suggested he hadn't slept at all after she'd left the barn. She didn't mention it. Neither did he. But something had shifted between them. Some invisible wall had developed a crack. They still didn't talk much, but the silence felt different now. Less like avoidance, more like understanding. Mara threw herself into the work with renewed purpose. The garden was taking shape. She'd cleared enough space to plant vegetables, using seeds she found in the pantry. The chickens were laying regularly now, and she'd even managed to barter some eggs with a passing trader for fabric to make new curtains. Small victories. But they mattered. 3 weeks into her time at the ranch, the first real problem arrived on horseback. Mara was hanging laundry when she heard the rider approaching. She looked up to see a man on a gray gelding, moving fast enough to kick up dust. He was older, maybe 60, with a weathered face and a badge pinned to his vest. Sheriff. Her stomach tightened. Rowan emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his pants. He didn't look surprised, just resigned. Sheriff Clayton, he said as the man dismounted. Cade. The sheriff's eyes swept over the ranch, taking in the improvements, before landing on Mara. This the girl from Redemption Gulch? Her name's Mara Vance, Rowan said. She works here. That what we're calling it? Clayton pulled a piece of paper from his pocket. Got a complaint filed. Dutch Holloway. Says you interfered with illegal debt collection. Rowan's expression didn't change. I paid the debt. Full amount. Public transaction. Witnesses. He's saying the arrangement was improper, that you took advantage. Took advantage? Mara stepped forward, anger flashing hot in her chest. He was auctioning me off like livestock. Mr. Cade paid what was owed. There's nothing improper about it. Clayton looked at her, and his expression softened slightly. I'm not saying I agree with Dutch, miss, but he's got friends in town. People who are asking questions about what exactly is happening out here. Nothing's happening out here except work, Rowan said flatly. Mara's got her own room, her own space. She's free to leave whenever she wants. That true? Clayton asked Mara. She thought about lying, thought about saying she was being held against her will, just to cause Dutch problems. But one look at Rowan's face stopped her. It's true, she said. Mr. Cade has been nothing but respectful. More respectful than anyone in Redemption Gulch ever was. Clayton nodded slowly. Dutch also mentioned that you made some accusations about his character, his intentions. I told the truth, Mar said. If he wants to call that an accusation, that's his problem. The truth as you see it. The truth as it is. Her voice was hard now. You want me to spell it out, Sheriff? Dutch Holloway tried to leverage my father's debt into something else. When I refused, he decided to humiliate me instead. Everything I said on that platform was accurate. Clayton sighed. Miss Vance, I'm going to give you some advice. Dutch is a powerful man in Redemption Gulch. Making an enemy of him isn't smart. I didn't make an enemy, I just didn't become a victim. Sometimes those are the same thing. Rowan stepped between them, his body language shifting into something protective. Sheriff, if Dutch has a legal complaint, file it proper. Otherwise, you're wasting your time and mine. Clayton studied Rowan for a long moment. You know, Cade, I've been doing this job for 20 years. I've learned to recognize certain types of men. You're the type who wants to be left alone. I respect that. But Dutch isn't going to let this go. Then he'll have to deal with disappointment. Or he'll make trouble. The kind you can't solve by keeping your head down. Rowan's jaw tightened. I'll handle it if it comes to that. See that you do, legally. Clayton mounted his horse, then paused. One more thing. There's talk in town about your past, where you came from. People are curious. People should mind their own business. Agreed. But they rarely do. Clayton tipped his hat to Mara. Miss Vance, you take care of yourself. He rode off, leaving a trail of dust that hung in the still air. Mara turned to Rowan. What did he mean about your past? Nothing that matters. If people are talking, let them talk. Rowan's voice was sharp. Words don't change anything. He walked back toward the barn, his shoulders tight with tension. Mara watched him go, frustration building in her chest. Every time she thought she was starting to understand him, he'd slam a door in her face. But she was starting to understand something else. Rowan Cade wasn't just running from his past. He was trying to outrun it, and the harder he worked, the faster he moved, the more it seemed to catch up with him anyway. That night, Mara made stew from the vegetables starting to come in from the garden. Rowan ate mechanically, his mind clearly elsewhere. "We should talk about what happens if Dutch comes here," Mara said. "He won't." "You don't know that." Rowan set down his spoon. "He's a coward. Cowards don't come themselves. They send others." "Then what happens when he sends others?" "I deal with it." "How?" His eyes met hers, and she saw something cold and certain there. "However I have to." The answer should have frightened her. Instead, it made her feel safer than she had in months. "I can use a rifle," she said. "My father taught me before he started drinking. I'm not great, but I can hit what I'm aiming at." Rowan looked surprised. "You offering to fight?" "I'm offering to defend what's mine now, too. This ranch, this place." She paused. "My freedom." Something shifted in Rowan's expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition. "There's a Winchester in the bedroom closet, ammunition in the kitchen drawer. You want to practice tomorrow?" "Yes." He nodded and went back to his stew. But Mara noticed the tension in his shoulders had eased slightly. They were building something here, she realized. Not just repairing a ranch, building an alliance, a partnership forged from shared damage and mutual need. It wasn't friendship, not yet, but it was something. The next morning, Rowan set up targets behind the barn, old cans lined up on fence posts. He handed Mara the Winchester, showed her how to check if it was loaded, how to aim properly. "Don't overthink it," he said, standing behind her. "Breathe out, squeeze the trigger. Don't pull." Mara fired. The can didn't move, but dust kicked up behind it. "High and right," Rowan said. "Adjust." She fired again. This time, the can jumped and fell. "Better?" They practiced for an hour. By the end, Mara was hitting more than she missed. Her shoulder ached from the rifle's kick, but she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Capable. Powerful. Rowan collected the fallen cans, his movements efficient. "You're a natural. My father was good at exactly two things, shooting and drinking. I only inherited one of them, thank heaven." The comment hung in the air. Rowan glanced at her, and for the first time she saw something that might have been amusement flicker across his face. "Heaven had nothing to do with it," he said. "That was all you." It wasn't much, barely a compliment. But coming from Rowan, it felt like a medal. They walked back to the house together, the rifle comfortable in Mara's hands now. She felt different, stronger, like she was becoming someone new out here in this harsh, unforgiving land. Or maybe she was becoming who she'd always been underneath, before Redemption Gulch and her father's debts had tried to crush it out of her. The weeks rolled into a month, then two. The ranch transformed under their combined efforts. The garden flourished, the barn roof got patched, the fence line stood straight and strong. Even the cattle looked healthier, their coats glossy from the better grazing rotation Rowan had implemented. Mara fell into a rhythm. Up before dawn, work until sunset, fall into bed exhausted. Her hands developed calluses on top of calluses. Her skin darkened from the sun. The too-tight dress got replaced with work clothes she'd sewn herself from fabric traded for eggs and vegetables. She stopped thinking about Redemption Gulch, stopped wondering what people there thought or said. It became a distant memory, like a bad dream that lost its power in daylight. But Rowan's nightmares didn't improve. If anything, they got worse. Mara would wake to the sound of him screaming, thrashing in the barn. Sometimes she'd go to him, sit nearby until he came back to himself. Other times she'd just lie in bed, listening, knowing there was nothing she could do. They never talked about it during the day. It was like an unspoken agreement. Nights were his to fight his demons alone. Days belonged to the work. But the toll was visible. Rowan grew thinner, his face more drawn. He pushed himself harder, worked longer hours. Mara recognized the pattern. It was the same one her father had followed. Different method, but same result. Trying to exhaust yourself enough to stop feeling. It didn't work. It never worked. One evening, about 10 weeks into her time at the ranch, Mara made a decision. After dinner, instead of letting Rowan disappear to the barn, she blocked the door. "We need to talk," she said. "About what?" "About the fact that you're killing yourself." Rowan's expression hardened. "That's not your concern." It is if you collapse and I'm left alone on this ranch with cattle I don't know how to manage and work I can't do by myself. You'd figure it out. That's not the point. Mara crossed her arms. You're working yourself into the ground. Not eating enough, not sleeping. You think I don't notice? What I do with my time is my business. Not when it affects both of us. She stepped closer. You want to punish yourself for what happened to your family. I understand that, but you're not doing it anymore. You're just existing, barely. Rowan's hands clenched into fists. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? I watched my father do the same thing. Different poison, same outcome. He drank himself to death because he couldn't stand to be sober. You're working yourself to death because you can't stand to be still. Her voice softened. It's the same thing, Rowan. It's just slower. My wife's name was Sarah, he said suddenly. My daughter was Emily. She had red hair like her mother. She liked to sing, made up songs about everything. Breakfast, chickens, clouds. Drove Sarah crazy sometimes, all that singing. Mara stayed quiet, letting him talk. The men who came, they didn't just kill them. They made it last. Made me listen. His voice was completely flat now, emotionless. I tried to break free. Fought until they knocked me out. When I woke up, the house was ash and my family was gone. I'm sorry. Everyone's sorry. Sorry doesn't bring them back. Sorry doesn't change the fact that I failed them. You didn't fail them. Evil men did evil things. That's not on you. I should have been faster, stronger, should have seen them coming. You're not invincible, Mara said. You were outnumbered. Sometimes there's nothing you can do. There's always something you can do. Rowan's eyes met hers, and the pain there was raw and terrible. I just didn't do it in time. Mara understood then. The nightmares, the work, the isolation. He wasn't punishing himself. He was preparing, making sure he'd never be caught off guard again, never be too slow, too weak, too unprepared. Is that why you bought my freedom? She asked. Because you saw someone helpless and it reminded you? Partly. What's the other part? Rowan was quiet for a long time. I needed to prove I could still do something good, that I wasn't just broken. The admission seemed to cost him. He turned away, his shoulders rigid. Mara walked around to face him. You're not broken, you're hurt. There's a difference. Is there? Yes. She said it with absolute certainty. Broken means you can't be fixed. Hurt means you're healing. It just takes time. It's been 3 years. So? Grief doesn't have a schedule, neither does trauma. Rowan looked at her like he was seeing her clearly for the first time. When did you get so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just further along in my own healing than you are in yours. She paused. My mother died when I was 16. Cancer. Took 2 years. By the end, she was begging to go. I watched her suffer every single day. That's different. Is it? Loss is loss. Pain is pain. The source doesn't matter as much as what you do with it. And what did you do with it? Mara smiled, but there was no humor in it. I let it turn me hard. Made me angry at everyone and everything. Pushed people away until I was alone. Sound familiar? Rowan didn't answer. The difference is, I got a second chance out here. You gave me that. Maybe it's time you gave yourself the same thing. I don't deserve it. Stop. Mara's voice was sharp. Don't talk about deserving. None of us deserve what happens to us, good or bad. We just get it. What matters is what we do next. Rowan stared at her, something working behind his eyes. What do you want me to do? Start by sleeping in the house. In your own bed. Stop hiding in the barn like you're not allowed to be comfortable. The nightmares, I know, I hear them anyway. At least if you're in the house, you'll have a real mattress. She softened her tone. You can't run from your mind, Rowan. Sleeping in a barn won't make the memories stop. But maybe not being alone will help. He looked torn, like he wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. One night, Mara said. Try it for one night. If it's worse, go back to the barn. But at least try. After a long moment, Rowan nodded. One night. That evening, he brought his few belongings from the barn to the main bedroom. Mara heard him moving around, settling in. It sounded strange, having another person in the house at night, but also right somehow. She lay in her own bed, listening to the sounds of the ranch at night, wind through the eaves, distant coyotes, the creak of settling wood. Around midnight, Rowan started dreaming. Mara heard the shift in his breathing, then the low moan that meant the nightmare was starting. She got up, padded quietly to his door. It was open a crack. He was thrashing, his face twisted in anguish. She could hear him muttering broken words, pleas, names. "Rowan," she said clearly, "wake up." He didn't respond, caught too deep in the dream. Mara stepped into the room, moved to the bed. She put a hand on his shoulder, firm but gentle. "Rowan, you're at the ranch. You're safe. Wake up." His eyes snapped open, wild and unfocused. His hand shot out, grabbing her wrist hard enough to hurt. "It's me," Mara said, not trying to pull away. "It's Mara. You're okay." Recognition filtered in slowly. Rowan's grip loosened, then released entirely. He sat up, breathing hard. "I hurt you," he said, seeing the red marks on her wrist. "You were asleep. It's fine." "It's not fine. I could have—" "But you didn't." Mara sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing her wrist. "The nightmare. Was it the same one?" Rowan nodded, still trying to catch his breath. "Tell me about them, your family. Not how they died. Who they were." He looked at her like she'd suggested something impossible. "Why?" "Because right now all you have are the bad memories. The trauma. Maybe if you remember the good things too, it'll balance out." "That's not how it works." "How do you know? Have you tried?" Rowan was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly he started talking. "Sarah was a teacher, came west to work in a schoolhouse. I met her when I was breaking horses for her father. She thought I was arrogant." A ghost of a smile. "She was right." "How'd you win her over?" "I didn't. She won me over. Just kept showing up, talking to me while I worked, asking questions, making me laugh even when I didn't want to." He paused. "She was stubborn. Once she decided something, that was it. No changing her mind." "Sounds like someone I know," Mara said. Rowan glanced at her, and for a moment the pain in his eyes eased. Emily was quieter, thoughtful. She'd watched things for hours, ants building a hill, clouds moving, water running. Sarah used to worry she was too serious for a child. "But she sang," Mara prompted. "Yeah, all the time. Made up the most ridiculous lyrics." His voice caught. The last morning, she was singing about pancakes. Something about how they were circles of joy that came from magical chickens. Mara smiled. "She sounds wonderful." She was. Rowan's hands were shaking now. They both were. And I couldn't save them. "You couldn't," Mara agreed. "But that doesn't mean you failed them. It means you were human. Humans can't do everything." "I should have died with them." "Maybe. But you didn't. And they wouldn't want you to spend the rest of your life punishing yourself for surviving." "You don't know that." "Yes, I do. Because if you died and they survived, would you want them to live like you're living now?" Rowan's breath caught. He closed his eyes. "Would you want Emily working herself to death in a barn, refusing to sleep, refusing to live?" Mara pressed. "Or would you want her to find a way forward? To honor your memory by being happy?" "That's different." "No, it's not. You just don't want to apply the same compassion to yourself that you'd give to them." Rowan opened his eyes, and they were wet. He didn't cry. Mara suspected he'd forgotten how. But the tears were there, threatening. "I don't know how to move forward," he said quietly. "Neither do I," Mara admitted, "but maybe we figure it out together, one day at a time." They sat there in the darkness, two broken people trying to piece themselves back together from the wreckage of their pasts. After a while, Rowan's breathing steadied. The tension left his shoulders. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For not letting me hide anymore." Mara stood. "Get some sleep, real sleep. I'll be right across the hall if you need me." She left him there and returned to her own bed. The ranch was quiet now, peaceful even. Through her window, she could see the stars spread across the sky like promises. Morning came bright and clear. Mara woke to the smell of coffee and found Rowan already in the kitchen, looking more rested than she'd seen him in weeks. "Sleep?" she asked. "Some. Better than usual." He poured her a cup. "You were right. Being in the house helped." "Don't sound so surprised." I'm not, just, he paused, not used to someone being right about what I need. Get used to it, Mara said. I'm right about a lot of things. The corner of Rowan's mouth twitched. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close. They fell into a new routine after that. Rowan slept in the house. The nightmares continued, but they were less severe. And when they came, Mara would talk him through them, grounding him in the present until the past released its grip. During the day they worked, but it felt different now, less like escape, more like building. They were creating something here, brick by brick, fence post by fence post. Mara started to feel something she'd thought was lost forever. Not happiness exactly, but contentment, purpose. She belonged here. On this ranch, in this harsh land, beside this damaged man who was slowly learning to live again. It was more than she'd ever had in Redemption Gulch. One afternoon, about 3 months into her time at the ranch, a traveling merchant stopped by. He was an older man with a wagon full of goods, fabric, tools, preserves, news from the wider world. Mara traded eggs and vegetables for thread and needles. Rowan bought ammunition and a new saw blade. As the merchant was preparing to leave, he turned to Rowan with a strange expression. You hear about the trouble down in Silver Creek? He asked. No? Gang came through about a week ago, burned 3 homesteads, killed 2 families. The merchant's face was grim. Sheriff said they were looking for someone, a man who'd killed one of theirs in Kansas a few years back. Mara felt ice slide down her spine. She looked at Rowan. His face had gone completely blank. They find who they were looking for? Rowan asked, his voice carefully neutral. No, but word is they're working their way north, asking questions, offering money for information. Descriptions? 5 men. Leader's got a scar across his face. Rides a black horse. The merchant climbed onto his wagon. Just thought you should know. Stay vigilant out here. He left, his wagon rattling down the road. Mara turned to Rowan. The men who killed your family. You went after them, didn't you? Rowan didn't answer, which was answer enough. How many did you find? 3 of the 5. His voice was flat. Took me a year. The other 2 disappeared. And now they're looking for you. Seems like it. Mara's mind raced. We need to leave. Go somewhere they can't find us. No. Rowan, if they come here, then I'll deal with it. He looked at her, and his eyes were hard again. That cold, resolved look she'd seen on the platform in Redemption Gulch. I'm not running anymore. I've run enough. This isn't about running. This is about survival. It's about both. Rowan walked toward the barn, then stopped. I need you to understand something, Mara. When they come, and they will come, it's going to get ugly. You can leave, should leave. I'll give you money, supplies, help you get to another town where you can start fresh. No. Mara, you bought my freedom. You gave me a home. You think I'm going to abandon you the moment things get dangerous? She stepped closer. We're in this together, whatever comes. These aren't men like Dutch. They're killers. They won't hesitate, won't show mercy. Then we won't either. Mara's voice was steady. You taught me to shoot, taught me to stand my ground. Time to see if the lesson stuck. Rowan studied her face, looking for doubt. He didn't find any. If we do this, there's no going back, he said. I know. People could die. People already have died. That's what started this whole thing. He nodded slowly. Then we prepare. Starting now. They spent the next 2 weeks turning the ranch into a fortress. Rowan reinforced the windows with shutters that could be barred from inside. He checked every weapon, cleaned and oiled them, stockpiled ammunition. He taught Mara to reload quickly, to shoot from cover, to stay calm under pressure. Mara worked on supplies, preserving food, storing water, making sure they could hold out if it came to a siege. They didn't talk about what would happen if they lost. There was no point. But at night, lying in her bed, Mara would wonder if she was crazy, choosing to stay and fight instead of running, choosing to tie her fate to a man she'd known for only 3 months. Then she'd remember that platform in Redemption Gulch, remember Dutch's hands on her face, the crowd's laughter, the crushing weight of helplessness. She'd rather die fighting beside Rowan Cade than spend another day as anyone's victim. The waiting was the worst part. Every distant dust cloud could be them. Every stranger passing through made Rowan tense, hand drifting to his gun. But days passed, then a week, then two. Nothing. Maybe the merchant had been wrong. Maybe the gang had turned a different direction. Maybe they'd gotten lucky. Mara was in the garden pulling weeds when she heard the horses. She looked up and saw them, 5 riders cresting the hill about a quarter-mile out. Even at this distance, she could see the leader. The scar across his face caught the afternoon light. Her heart kicked into high gear. She dropped the weeds and ran for the house. "Rowan!" He emerged from the barn, saw the riders, and his whole body went still. Then he moved, fast and purposeful. "Inside," he said. "Now." They ran together, hitting the house at a sprint. Rowan slammed the door, threw the bar across. He grabbed the Winchester from where it hung by the fireplace, checked the load. "Upstairs," he said to Mara. "Window overlooks the front. You see a clean shot, you take it." "Where will you be?" "Down here. They come through the door, I'll be waiting." Mara wanted to argue, to stay beside him, but she knew the tactics were sound. High ground, crossfire. Better chance. She grabbed the rifle she'd been practicing with and headed for the stairs. "Mara." She turned. Rowan was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Whatever happens," he said, "you did good. Here. At the ranch. You did real good." It sounded like goodbye. "Don't," Mara said. "We're both walking away from this." "If we do, when we do," she corrected. "When we do, you're going to finally let yourself live. Really live, not just exist. Promise me." Rowan's jaw worked, then he nodded. "I promise." Mara went upstairs, positioned herself at the window. Below, she could see the riders approaching slowly, spreading out as they got closer to the house. The leader stopped about 50 yards out. He was exactly as the merchant described, scar bisecting his face from temple to jaw, riding a black horse that looked mean. "Rowan Cade, Port," he called out, his voice carried across the empty land. "We know you're in there." Silence from the house. "You killed 3 of ours. Now we've come to settle accounts." Still nothing. The scarred man's patience seemed to run out. He gestured, and 2 of his men dismounted, started approaching the house with rifles raised. Mara's finger found the trigger. She forced herself to breathe slowly, the way Rowan had taught her. Exhale. Squeeze. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. One of the approaching men went down, clutching his leg. All hell broke loose. The riders scattered, returning fire. Windows shattered, wood splintered. Mara ducked down, heart hammering, then popped back up to fire again. Below, she heard Rowan's Winchester barking, heard someone scream. This was it, the moment everything had been building toward. And Mara discovered something about herself in that moment of chaos and gunfire. She wasn't afraid, she was angry. The anger burned clean and hot, cutting through any fear that might have paralyzed her. These men had come to kill Rowan, to finish what they'd started 3 years ago when they murdered his family. They'd burned homesteads in Silver Creek, killed innocent people just trying to find him. Mara fired again, missed, adjusted, fired once more. Another man dropped, this one not getting back up. Bullets tore through the house walls like they were paper. Mara pressed herself against the floor, crawling to a different window. She could hear Rowan moving below, his footsteps deliberate despite the chaos. 2 down, she shouted. I see 3 left, Rowan called back. The leader's circling around back. Mara scrambled across the room to the rear window. Sure enough, the scarred man had dismounted and was creeping toward the back door, using the barn for cover. She lined up her shot, but he was moving fast, staying low. She squeezed the trigger anyway. The bullet kicked up dirt near his feet, and he dove behind a water trough. He's pinned by the trough, Mara yelled. She heard the back door open, then Rowan's voice, cold as winter. Stand up. The scarred man rose slowly, hands away from his guns. Mara kept her rifle trained on him through the window. Rowan Cade, the man said. His voice was rough, like gravel in a barrel. Been looking for you a long time. Found me. Rowan stepped into view, Winchester leveled at the man's chest. Now what? Now we settle this. You killed my brother in Kansas. Johnny was a murderer and a rapist who burned my family alive, Rowan interrupted. Your brother got what he deserved. So did the other 2 I found. The scarred man's face twisted. They were kin. They were monsters. You don't get to decide that. I do when they come to my home and slaughter innocent people. Rowan's voice was absolutely level, but Mara could hear the rage underneath, compressed into something dense and dangerous. You want to talk about justice? Let's talk about Sarah, about Emily, about what your brother did to them before he set that fire. That wasn't supposed to happen, the scarred man said, and for a moment he looked almost human. Johnny, he had problems. We were just supposed to scare you, take what you had, but he got carried away and you let him. Rowan took a step closer. You stood there and let him murder a woman and a child. That makes you just as guilty. The scarred man's hand twitched toward his gun. Don't, Rowan said quietly. But the man was already moving, fast and desperate. His hand closed on the pistol grip. Rowan shot him through the heart. The man fell backward, dead before he hit the ground. Mara heard shouting from the front of the house. The remaining 2 men were mounting their horses, had seen their leader fall. One of them fired wildly at the house as they spurred their horses into a run. She tracked them with her rifle, fired twice. One horse stumbled but kept running. Within moments, the riders were disappearing over the hill, leaving dust and their dead behind. Silence crashed down like a physical thing. Mara's ears were ringing from the gunfire. Her hands were shaking now, adrenaline making her fingers twitch on the rifle. She set it down carefully and stood on legs that felt like water. Down below, she heard Rowan moving. She made her way downstairs on trembling knees. Rowan was standing in the kitchen, staring at the scarred man's body visible through the open back door. His Winchester was still in his hands, but loosely now, like he'd forgotten he was holding it. Rowan, Mara said. He didn't respond, didn't move. She walked over and gently took the rifle from his hands, set it aside. It's over. No. His voice was hollow. They'll tell others, those 2 who ran. They'll spread word about where I am. Then we'll deal with it when it comes. You don't understand. Rowan finally looked at her, and his eyes were full of something dark and terrible. I thought killing them would fix it. The first 3, I hunted them down one by one. Thought it would make the nightmares stop. Thought it would bring me peace. Did it? No. It just made me a killer too. Mara grabbed his face with both hands, forcing him to focus on her. You're not a killer. You're a survivor who fought back. There's a difference. Is there? Yes. She said it with absolute conviction. They came here to murder you, to finish what they started. You defended yourself. That's not murder. That's survival. Rowan's breath was coming fast now, his whole body starting to shake. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving shock in its wake. I've got you, Mara said, pulling him into her arms. I've got you. He collapsed against her, this strong man who'd been holding himself together through sheer force of will. His arms wrapped around her like she was the only solid thing in a world gone liquid. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other while the sun moved across the sky and the bodies of the dead cooled in the yard. Eventually, Rowan pulled back. His face was composed again, but his eyes were red. We need to bury them, he said, before dark. I'll help. They worked in silence, digging graves behind the barn. It was hard, grim work. The soil was rocky and unyielding. Mara's hands blistered even through her gloves. As they lowered the scarred man into his grave, Rowan paused. His name was Marcus Hendry, he said quietly. His brother Johnny was the one who did the worst of it, to Sarah and Emily. How do you know his name? I made it my business to know. When I went after them, I learned everything, their names, their families, where they came from. Rowan stared down at the body. I wanted to understand how someone becomes that kind of evil. Did you figure it out? No, there's no logic to it. Some people are just broken in ways that can't be fixed. He started shoveling dirt. But I learned that revenge doesn't heal anything. It just makes you empty. They finished the graves as the sun was setting, marking them with simple stones. Rowan stood looking at them for a long moment. I should feel something, he said. Relief, maybe. Justice. But I just feel tired. That's because it's over, Mara said. Really over. The men who killed your family are gone. All of them. You can stop running now. What if I don't know how? Then you learn. Same way you're learning everything else. They walked back to the house together. The front was riddled with bullet holes, windows shattered, furniture torn apart by gunfire. It looked like a war zone. We'll fix it, Mara said, reading his expression. We've fixed worse." That night, they worked side by side to board up the broken windows and sweep up the glass. It was after midnight when they finally stopped, both too exhausted to continue. Mara made coffee on the stove that had somehow survived unscathed. They sat at the kitchen table, drinking it in silence. "You could have run," Rowan said finally, "when the shooting started. Could have slipped out and been gone before anyone noticed." "Could have," Mara agreed. "Didn't want to." "Why not?" She thought about it. "Because for the first time in my life, I was fighting for something that mattered. Not just surviving, actually fighting." "And that was worth risking your life?" "Yes." She met his eyes. "This ranch, this life we're building, it's worth fighting for. Worth dying for if it comes to that." Rowan looked at her like he was seeing something he hadn't expected. "You're braver than you think. So are you. You just don't let yourself believe it." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his whole face. It was the first time she'd seen him truly smile, and it made him look years younger. "We make quite a pair," he said. "Two broken people trying to fix each other. Maybe that's exactly what we need." They sat there as the night deepened around them, two survivors who'd found each other in the aftermath of violence and loss, learning slowly that healing was possible even when it seemed impossible. The next morning, Sheriff Clayton arrived with 3 deputies. Someone in the area had heard the gunfire and reported it. Clayton surveyed the damage with a grim expression. The bullet holes, the boarded windows, the fresh graves behind the barn. "Tell me what happened," he said. Rowan told him everything. The gang from Kansas, the murders of his family, his hunt for justice, the final confrontation. He didn't embellish or make excuses, just stated the facts in his flat, emotionless way. Clayton listened without interrupting. When Rowan finished, the sheriff walked over to the graves, looked at them for a long moment. "Marcus Hendry," he said. "Got wanted posters on him in 3 territories. Murder, robbery, assault." He turned back to Rowan. "You're telling me you killed him and 2 of his men in self-defense?" "That's what happened." "And Miss Vance can corroborate?" "I was upstairs with a rifle," Mara said. "They came here to kill us. We defended ourselves." Clayton studied them both. "You know what I think? I think you 2 just saved me a lot of trouble. Hendry's been terrorizing this territory for years. Nobody could catch him." He spat into the dirt. "But officially, I need to take statements. Make sure everything's proper." "We understand," Rowan said. "Unofficially?" Clayton's expression softened. "You did what you had to do. And from what I can see, you did it clean. That's more than most could manage." They gave their statements. One of the deputies wrote everything down in careful longhand. The whole process took hours. When they were finally done, Clayton pulled Rowan aside. Mara watched them talk, saw Rowan's shoulders tighten, then gradually relax. "What did he say?" she asked after Clayton and his men had ridden off. "That the 2 who escaped will probably spread word about what happened here. That we should expect more trouble from anyone connected to the Hendry gang." Rowan paused. "But he also said that most outlaws are cowards. With Marcus dead and their operation broken, they'll likely scatter rather than come after us." "You believe him?" "I want to." Rowan looked at the damaged house, at the graves, at the land that had become his refuge. "But I'm going to stay ready just in case." The days that followed were strange. They worked to repair the damage, replacing windows, patching bullet holes, fixing broken furniture. But underneath the physical work was something else, a shift in how they moved around each other. The attack had stripped away the last of their careful distance. They'd fought side by side, trusted each other with their lives. That kind of bond couldn't be undone. Mara noticed it in small ways. How Rowan would unconsciously move closer when she was working, like his body wanted to stay near hers. How she'd catch herself looking for him when he was out of sight, just to make sure he was okay. They still didn't talk about it. Neither of them knew how. One evening, about a week after the attack, Mara was in the kitchen preparing dinner when Rowan came in from checking the cattle. He was covered in dust, his shirt sticking to him with sweat. "There's water heating if you want to wash up," she said. "Thanks." He started toward the back room where they kept the wash basin, then stopped. "Mara?" "Yeah?" "I've been thinking about what you said, about letting myself live, really live." She set down the knife she'd been using to cut vegetables. And I don't know if I remember how. It's been so long since I let myself feel anything except anger and grief. He turned to face her fully. But I want to try. With you. If you're willing. Mara's heart kicked against her ribs. What are you saying? I'm saying that you're not just working off a debt anymore. You haven't been for a while now. Rowan took a step closer. I'm saying that somewhere along the way, this became real. You became important. This, he gestured around the kitchen, the house, became home again. Rowan, you don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know. He looked uncertain, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. The debt's paid. Has been for weeks, if I'm honest about what fair labor's worth. You're free to go if you want. I'll give you money, help you get settled somewhere. But if you want to stay, if this matters to you the way it matters to me, then stay. Not as hired help. As a partner. As... Mara crossed the distance between them and kissed him. For a moment, Rowan froze, shocked. Then his arms came around her, pulling her close, and he kissed her back with 3 years of pent-up loneliness and need. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Mara rested her forehead against his. I'm staying, she said. Not because I owe you, because I choose to. Because this matters to me, too. Rowan's hands came up to frame her face, gentle despite their calluses. I don't know how to do this. How to be with someone again. Neither do I. We'll figure it out as we go. I'm going to mess it up, have nightmares, push you away, do stupid things. I'm going to be difficult and stubborn and pick fights over nothing. Mara smiled. We'll both mess it up. That's part of being human. I'm terrified, Rowan admitted. Me too. She kissed him again, softer this time. But I'd rather be terrified with you than safe and alone anywhere else. They stood there in the kitchen as the sun set outside, holding each other like they'd found something precious they'd both thought was lost forever. The possibility of a future, of happiness, of home. That night, for the first time since Mara had arrived, Rowan slept without nightmares. The weeks turned into months. Summer faded into fall, and fall into the first cold breath of winter. The ranch thrived under their combined care. The cattle grew fat, the garden produced abundantly, and the repairs from the attack were completed with new wood that would weather with time. But the change in Rowan was the most remarkable transformation. He smiled more, laughed occasionally, allowed himself moments of peace. He still worked hard, but it was no longer desperate escape, just honest labor from a man who took pride in what he'd built. Mara bloomed too. The scared, humiliated girl from the auction platform was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her own strength. She'd faced down armed men and won. She'd built a home from nothing. She'd chosen her own life instead of having it chosen for her. They were partners now in every sense, working the ranch together, making decisions together, building a life that belonged to both of them. On a cold November morning, Mara was feeding the chickens when she saw riders approaching. Her hand went automatically to the rifle she now carried everywhere. But these weren't outlaws. It was Sheriff Clayton and another man she didn't recognize. Rowan came out of the barn, his own rifle in hand, but relaxed when he saw who it was. Sheriff, he said. What brings you out here? Clayton dismounted, his expression serious. Got some news. Thought you should hear it direct. He gestured to the other man. This is Marshal Garrett from the Territorial Office. The marshal was young, maybe 30, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense bearing. Mr. Cade, Miss Vance, I've been investigating the Hendry gang for the past 6 months. They still operating? Rowan asked, his body tensing. No. That's what I came to tell you. The two who escaped from here, they tried to reorganize, gather new men, but word spread about what happened, about how you and Miss Vance held them off, killed their leader. Garrett smiled slightly. Turns out, outlaws don't like joining gangs that get beaten by 2 people on a ranch. The operation fell apart. Last I heard, those 2 are in Mexico, trying to disappear. Mara felt something loosen in her chest. So it's really over? It's really over, Garrett confirmed. There's one more thing. The territorial governor is offering a reward for information leading to the dismantling of the Hendry gang, $500. He pulled an envelope from his coat. That's yours. Rowan stared at the envelope like it might bite him. I don't want blood money. It's not blood money. It's compensation for doing what the law should have done years ago. Garrett pushed the envelope into Rowan's hands. Take it. Use it for something good. After the marshal and sheriff left, Rowan and Mara stood in the yard, looking at the envelope. "What do we do with it?" Mara asked. Rowan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "We use it to make this place better. Buy more cattle, fix the barn roof properly, maybe add a room to the house." "A room for what?" He looked at her, and there was something soft and hopeful in his expression. "For the future, whatever that brings." Mara understood what he was really saying. He was choosing to believe in tomorrow, to plan for it, instead of just surviving day to day. "I like that idea," she said. They walked back to the house together, Rowan's arm around her shoulders, her hand in his. The ranch spread out around them, their ranch now, built from grief and determination, and the stubborn refusal to let trauma define them. That evening, they sat on the porch watching the sun set. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, the mountains dark silhouettes against the fading light. "Do you still have nightmares?" Mara asked. "Sometimes," Rowan admitted, "but less often. And when I do, they're different now." "How?" "They don't end the same way. In the old dreams, I was always too late, always watching them die." He paused. "Now sometimes I dream about them, but they're at peace. Sarah and Emily, they're okay. And I can let them go." Mara took his hand. "You think they'd approve? Of this? Of us? I think Sarah would like you. She always appreciated stubborn women who didn't take nonsense from anyone." Rowan smiled. "And Emily would have followed you around asking a million questions. She was curious about everything. I wish I could have met them." "Me too." Rowan squeezed her hand. "But they'd want this for me, want me to be happy again. I'm starting to believe that." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear. The ranch was quiet, except for the occasional sound of horses moving in the corral, the distant call of a coyote. "Rowan," Mara said eventually, "there's something I need to tell you." He turned to look at her, alert. "What is it?" "I love you." The words came out simple and clear. "I don't know when it started. Maybe when you cut that rope on the platform. Maybe when you let me fight beside you. Maybe every day in between. But I love you, and I needed you to know." Rowan's expression went through several shifts, surprise, fear, then something that looked like joy. "I love you too," he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. "I didn't think I'd ever say those words again. Didn't think I deserved to. But with you, I'm learning that maybe I do. That maybe we both do." He pulled her close and kissed her, and it was different from before. Not desperate or tentative, just certain, a promise made and accepted. When they finally went inside, the house felt different too. Not just a shelter or a place to work, a real home filled with the possibility of happiness. They lay in bed together that night, Mara's head on Rowan's chest, listening to his heartbeat steady and strong. "What do you think happens next?" she asked. "I don't know," Rowan said honestly. "But for the first time in 3 years, I'm not afraid to find out." Mara smiled in the darkness. "Good, because whatever comes, we face it together." "Together," Rowan agreed. Outside, the wind moved through the grass, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. The ranch settled into its foundations, solid and enduring, and two people who'd been broken by loss and cruelty slowly put themselves back together, piece by piece, learning that healing was possible and that love could grow even in the harshest soil. The past would always be there, a shadow they'd carry. But the future was theirs to build, and for the first time they both believed it would be worth building. Somewhere in the darkness, the land spread out vast and unforgiving, full of dangers and uncertainties. But here, in this small house on this struggling ranch, two survivors had found something stronger than fear. They'd found each other, and that was enough. The night deepened around them, but inside there was warmth and safety, and the quiet knowledge that tomorrow would come, and they would face it side by side, as partners, as equals, as people who had chosen each other despite everything that tried to break them. It wasn't a perfect ending. There would still be hard days ahead, still be moments of doubt and fear, still be work that never seemed to end, but it was real. It was theirs. And in a world that had taken so much from both of them, that was everything. Winter came hard that year, blowing in from the mountains with a vengeance that caught even the old-timers by surprise. Snow fell in heavy sheets, piling up against the barn until Rowan had to dig paths twice a day just to reach the animals. The wind howled through gaps in the boards they hadn't found yet, making the house creak and groan like a ship at sea. But inside, there was warmth. Mara had never been happier, which was strange considering how difficult everything was. The cold made every task harder. Water froze in the pump and had to be thawed each morning. The cattle needed constant attention to keep them from freezing or starving. Even gathering eggs became an expedition that required layers of clothing and careful planning. Yet she'd wake up each morning beside Rowan, watch him dress in the gray pre-dawn light, and feel something she'd never expected to feel again. Contentment, purpose, love. They worked together like they'd been doing it for decades instead of months. Rowan would haul feed while Mara broke ice on the water troughs. She'd cook while he repaired whatever the wind had damaged overnight. They moved around each other with an easy rhythm, communicating more through looks and gestures than words. On the worst days, when the storm was too fierce to go outside, they'd stay in the house and work on the inside projects. Rowan built new furniture from lumber he'd stockpiled. Mara sewed curtains and repaired their worn clothes. Sometimes they'd just sit by the fire, reading or talking, Rowan's arm around her shoulders while the wind tried to tear the world apart outside. It was during one of these storms, nearly 2 months after their first kiss, that the past came calling again. They were having dinner when they heard pounding on the door. Not knocking, pounding, desperate and frantic. Rowan was on his feet immediately, rifle in hand. Mara grabbed her own gun, her heart racing. "Who's there?" Rowan called out. "Please!" A woman's voice nearly lost in the wind. "Please, I need help!" Rowan and Mara exchanged glances. It could be a trap. Could be someone using a woman to get them to open the door. But it could also be genuine. Rowan made the decision. He unbarred the door and pulled it open, gun ready. A woman practically fell inside, covered in snow, shaking violently. She was young, maybe 20, with dark hair plastered to her face and eyes wide with terror. Behind her, the storm raged. Mara slammed the door shut while Rowan kept his rifle trained on the woman. "Who are you?" "Anna," the woman gasped. "Anna Weber. Please, my husband, he's hurt. Our wagon broke down about a mile from here. He can't walk. The cold, it's—" She broke down sobbing. Mara looked at Rowan. His jaw was tight, weighing the risks. It could still be a setup, but the woman's fear seemed genuine, and if there really was an injured man out in this storm, he wouldn't last the night. "Stay with her," Rowan said to Mara. "Keep your gun on her. I'll check it out." "You're not going alone," Mara said. "One of us needs to stay here. Make sure this isn't—" "I know what it might be," Mara interrupted. "But if there really is someone hurt out there, you'll need help getting them back. And if it's a trap, 2 guns are better than 1. The woman looked between them, her face desperate. "Please, I'm not lying. My husband, he's freezing to death out there. We were trying to reach Silver Creek before the storm hit, but the wheel broke and he tried to fix it, and the wagon fell on his leg." "All right," Rowan cut her off. He looked at Mara. "We go together. But you see anything that looks wrong, you shoot first and ask questions later." "Same to you." They bundled up in the heaviest coats, hats, and gloves. Rowan took a rope from the barn and tied one end to the porch post, the other around his waist. In a storm like this, you could lose your way between the house and the barn. A mile out and back was asking for trouble. Anna led them into the blizzard, stumbling through snow that was already knee-deep. The wind hit like fists, stealing breath and vision. Mara kept one hand on the rope, the other on her rifle. Behind her, Rowan moved with steady determination. They found the wagon where Anna had said it would be, tilted at an angle with one wheel completely shattered. Underneath it, half buried in snow, was a man. He was conscious, barely. His face was gray, lips blue. His leg was trapped under the wagon's weight. And even through his pants, Mara could see the unnatural angle of the brake. "Help him," Anna sobbed. "Please." Rowan assessed the situation quickly. "We need to lift the wagon. Mara, on 3, we lift. Anna, you pull him out." They positioned themselves. Rowan counted down, and they lifted with everything they had. The wagon rose just enough. Anna dragged her husband clear, and they let it drop. The man screamed when his leg moved, then passed out from the pain. "We need to get him to the house," Rowan said. "Now, before we all freeze." Between the 3 of them, they managed to get the unconscious man up and moving. It was brutal work. The man was dead weight, and the storm fought them every step. Mara's muscles burned, her lungs ached from the cold air, but she kept moving. 1 foot forward, then another. following the rope back toward home. It took forever and no time at all. Suddenly they were at the porch, dragging the man inside, Anna crying with relief. They laid him on the floor near the fire. Rowan cut away the man's pants leg, revealing the break. The bone hadn't punctured the skin, but the leg was badly swollen and positioned wrong. "I need to set it," Rowan said, his voice grim. "Mara, get the whiskey and some strips of cloth. Anna, hold his shoulders." Anna nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Will he be all right? If we're lucky, an infection doesn't set in." Rowan looked at the man's gray face. "What's his name?" "Thomas. Thomas Weber." "All right, Thomas, this is going to hurt." But Thomas was still unconscious, which was probably a mercy. Rowan worked quickly and efficiently, pulling the leg straight while Anna held her husband down, and Mara provided supplies. The bone shifted with an audible click that made Anna gasp. Thomas's eyes flew open and he screamed, a sound of pure agony. Then he passed out again. Rowan splinted the leg with firewood and strips of cloth, wrapped it tight, then sat back on his heels. "Best I can do. He needs a real doctor, but nothing's moving in this storm." "Thank you," Anna whispered. "Thank you so much." They moved Thomas to Mara's small bedroom, the only spare space in the house. Mara helped Anna get him into the bed, covered him with every blanket they could spare. Back in the main room, Anna finally broke down completely, sobbing into her hands. Mara sat beside her, offering what comfort she could. "We were so stupid," Anna said through her tears. "Everyone said the storm was coming. Everyone said to wait. But Thomas, he got a job offer in Silver Creek, construction work. Good pay. We thought we could make it before the weather turned." "Where are you from?" Rowan asked. "Redemption Gulch." Mara felt ice that had nothing to do with the weather slide down her spine. She looked at Anna more carefully. "I don't remember you from town." "We only moved there 6 months ago, from Missouri." Anna wiped her eyes. "We didn't have much money, couldn't afford a place to live. We were staying with Thomas's cousin, but—" She trailed off. "But what?" Mara asked gently. Anna looked embarrassed. "His cousin works for Dutch Holloway, at the debt collection office. There was talk that we should leave town before Dutch decided Thomas owed him something too. So when the job offer came, we took it." Rowan and Mara exchanged glances. Dutch Holloway. The name was like a bad penny that kept showing up. "You know him?" Anna asked, catching the look. "We've met," Mara said carefully. "He's the one who held my father's debt, tried to collect it from me." Anna's eyes widened. "You're Mara Vance? The girl from the auction?" Mara nodded, feeling old shame try to rise up. She pushed it back down. "That was me. I heard about that. Everyone in town talked about it for weeks, about how some rancher paid your debt and took you away." Anna looked at Rowan. "That was you?" "Yes," Rowan said simply. Anna studied them both, understanding dawning on her face. "You're together. Really together, I mean. Not just... people in town said terrible things about what kind of arrangement it must be, but it's real." "It's real," Mara confirmed. Anna started crying again, but softer this time. "That gives me hope, that something good can come from a place like Redemption Gulch. We were starting to think it was all just cruelty and suffering." "It's not all bad," Mara said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. "There are good people there too, just quieter than the bad ones." They made up a bed for Anna by the fire. Thomas stayed unconscious through the night, his breathing shallow but steady. The storm continued to rage outside, showing no signs of letting up. Rowan and Mara retreated to his bedroom, the only private space left. "You think his leg will heal right?" Mara asked as they undressed. "I hope so, but even if it does, he's got weeks of recovery ahead. Maybe months." Rowan pulled off his shirt. "They can't travel. Not in this weather, not with that injury." "So they stay here. You all right with that?" Mara thought about it. The house was small, privacy would be scarce, and they barely had enough supplies for 2 people, let alone 4. But what choice did they have? Turning the Webers out would be a death sentence. "We make it work," she said, "same as we make everything else work." Rowan pulled her close, kissed the top of her head. "I knew there was a reason I loved you." They climbed into bed, exhausted from the rescue. Outside, the wind howled and the snow continued to fall. Inside, 4 people huddled against the cold, strangers bound together by circumstance and necessity. The storm lasted 3 more days. During that time, the small house became even smaller. Thomas developed a fever on the second day, thrashing and crying out in delirium. Anna barely left his side, trying to cool him with wet cloths while Rowan and Mara kept the house running. They were running low on firewood. Rowan had to make trips to the woodpile every few hours, each journey a fight against the wind and snow. Mara stretched their food as far as it would go, watery stews and thin soups that filled the belly without much nutrition. The close quarters revealed things about each other. Mara learned that Anna had lost a child the year before, born too early to survive. That she and Thomas had left Missouri to escape the memories, hoping a fresh start would heal the wound. "Doesn't work that way, though, does it?" Anna said one night while Thomas slept fitfully. "You can't run from grief. It follows you." "No," Mara agreed. "But you can build something new alongside it, make room for both the grief and the joy." Anna looked at her with tired eyes. "You sound like someone who knows." "I am." They bonded over shared loss, shared understanding of what it meant to survive when everything tried to break you. Anna was softer than Mara, more inclined to tears and emotional displays. But underneath there was steel. She'd had to be strong to make it this far. On the 4th day, the storm finally broke. The sun came out, blindingly bright on the fresh snow, and the world emerged transformed. Everything was white and clean, sculpted by wind into drifts that reached halfway up the barn walls. Thomas's fever broke that same day. He woke lucid for the first time, confused but aware. Anna cried with relief, holding his hand like she'd never let go. "Where are we?" Thomas asked, his voice hoarse. "The Cade Ranch," Anna told him. "They saved us. Both of us." Thomas looked at Rowan and Mara with exhausted gratitude. "Thank you. I don't know how to repay—" "Don't worry about it," Rowan said. "Just focus on healing." But healing took time, and time meant resources they didn't have in abundance. The extra mouths to feed strained their supplies. Rowan had to butcher one of the cattle earlier than planned. Mara rationed everything carefully, making each ingredient stretch as far as possible. And slowly, without anyone quite planning it, the 4 of them became something like a family. Thomas was a carpenter by trade, and even stuck in bed he could be useful. He taught Rowan better joinery techniques, showed him how to make furniture that would last generations instead of just years. Anna helped Mara with the endless domestic work, cooking, cleaning, mending. The house ran more smoothly with 4 sets of hands, even if one set was temporarily out of commission. They talked in the evenings, sharing stories around the fire. Thomas and Anna spoke about Missouri, about the life they'd left behind. Rowan gradually opened up about Kansas, about Sarah and Emily. Not the terrible parts, those he kept locked away, but the good memories, the happy times. Mara told them about her father, about the slow descent into alcoholism and debt, about the auction that had changed everything. "Dutch Holloway is still causing problems back in town," Anna said one night. "Before we left, there was talk that he was running for mayor. Can you imagine? That man with real power?" "He already has power," Mara said bitterly. "A title would just make it official." "There's resistance, though," Thomas added. He was sitting up now, his legs still splinted, but healing well. "Some of the business owners, they're pushing back, saying Dutch has too much control over too many debts, that he uses them like chains." "Who's leading that resistance?" Rowan asked. "Man named Crenshaw, owns the feed store. He's gathering signatures, trying to get an investigation into Dutch's business practices." Mara felt something stir in her chest. Hope, maybe. Or vindication. "You think it'll work?" "I don't know," Thomas admitted. "Dutch has friends in high places, and enemies tend to disappear or give up." "Someone needs to stand up to him," Anna said quietly. "Really stand up, not just whisper complaints and hope someone else does something." The words hung in the air. Mara felt Rowan looking at her, could sense what he was thinking. They'd stood up to Dutch once, walked away from Redemption Gulch and built a new life. But maybe walking away wasn't enough. Maybe some fights needed to be finished, but that was a problem for another day. Right now, they had more immediate concerns. As January turned to February, Thomas's leg healed enough for him to hobble around with a crutch Rowan made. The Webbers started talking about moving on, about getting to Silver Creek and the job that might still be waiting. "You don't have to rush," Mara said. "Stay until you're fully healed." We've imposed enough, Anna said, though her eyes were reluctant. You've been more than generous, but we need to stand on our own feet again. At least wait until spring, Rowan suggested. The roads are still bad and Thomas's leg won't handle hard travel yet. So they stayed. And as winter slowly released its grip, something unexpected happened. A rider arrived one afternoon in early March, when the snow was finally starting to melt. Mara saw him coming from a distance and called for Rowan. The rider was Sheriff Clayton, and his face was grave. "Sheriff," Rowan said as Clayton dismounted, "what brings you out here?" "Trouble in Redemption Gulch." Clayton's eyes flicked to the house, where Thomas and Anna had appeared in the doorway. "Mr. and Mrs. Weber, didn't expect to find you here." "Our wagon broke down in the storm," Thomas explained. "The Cades took us in." Clayton nodded. "Lucky for you, that storm killed 3 people trying to travel." He turned back to Rowan. "I need your help." "With what?" "Dutch Holloway's finally gone too far. He tried to collect a debt from the Crenshaw family. When Crenshaw refused, Dutch sent some men to intimidate them. Things got violent. Crenshaw's son is in bad shape, maybe won't make it." Mara felt her stomach drop. "You're saying Dutch ordered an attack?" "I'm saying his men did the attacking, and Dutch hasn't denied sending them." Clayton looked tired. "The town's had enough. People are ready to act, but they need someone to testify. Someone who stood up to Dutch before and lived to tell about it." He was looking at Mara. "You want me to testify against him?" Mara asked. "I want you to tell the truth about what he tried to do to you, about why you ended up on that auction block." Clayton paused. "There are other women, too, who've had similar experiences with Dutch, but they're afraid to speak. If you go first, they might find the courage to follow." Mara looked at Rowan. His expression was carefully neutral, leaving the decision to her. "What happens if I testify?" she asked. "Dutch gets arrested. We have a trial. If there's enough evidence, he goes to prison or worse." Clayton's voice hardened. "But you need to understand, this won't be easy. Dutch will fight back. He'll try to destroy your reputation, call you a liar, drag up every mistake you've ever made." "Let him try," Mara said, surprised by how calm she felt. "I'm not afraid of Dutch Holloway anymore." "You sure about this?" Rowan asked quietly. "I'm sure." Mara looked at the sheriff. "When do you need me?" "Trial's set for 2 weeks from now. I'll send a deputy to escort you into town when it's time." After Clayton left, the house was quiet. Thomas and Anna retreated to give them privacy, sensing the weight of what had just happened. "You don't have to do this," Rowan said. "Yes, I do." Mara sat down, her hands shaking slightly now that the decision was made. "If I don't, Dutch just keeps hurting people. He already came after you once through that complaint. Next time, it might be worse. I can handle Dutch. I know you can, but you shouldn't have to. None of us should." She looked up at him. "I spent my whole life being afraid. Afraid of my father's anger, afraid of the town's judgment, afraid of Dutch's power. I'm done being afraid." Rowan pulled her into his arms. "Then I'll be right there beside you, whatever you need. I just need you to believe me, to stand with me when Dutch tries to make me look like a liar. Always," Rowan promised. The 2 weeks passed quickly. Thomas's leg was strong enough now for short walks, and he insisted on helping Rowan with the spring preparations, checking fence lines, preparing for calving season, planning the garden. Anna and Mara worked on Mara's testimony, going over every detail of her interactions with Dutch. Every time he'd cornered her with offers that were really threats. Every insinuation, every touch that had made her skin crawl. It was harder than Mara expected, reliving it all. She'd buried those memories, tried to forget. Now she had to dig them up and examine them in harsh daylight. "You're brave," Anna said one afternoon. "Braver than I could ever be." "You walked through a blizzard to save your husband," Mara pointed out. "That's pretty brave." "That's different. That's love. What you're doing, standing up to power, risking everything to do what's right, that takes a different kind of courage." Mara wasn't sure about that. To her, it felt less like courage and more like necessity. Dutch had taken enough from enough people. Someone had to stop him, and she had the power to do it. That had to count for something. The deputy arrived on a gray morning, leading an extra horse for Mara. The plan was simple. Ride to Redemption Gulch, give testimony, ride back. One day, maybe 2, Rowan saddled his own horse without being asked. You don't have to come, Mara said. I know. He checked his rifle, slid it into the scabbard. But I'm coming anyway. Thomas approached, leaning heavily on his crutch. I'm coming too. Thomas, your leg, Anna started. Is healed enough, he finished. I can ride. And Mara shouldn't face this alone. Neither should you, Anna said firmly. If you're going, I'm going. So all four of them rode toward Redemption Gulch, the deputy shaking his head but not arguing. They made a strange group, two couples who'd been strangers months ago, now bound together by shared survival and mutual respect. The town appeared on the horizon as the sun reached its peak. Mara felt her stomach tighten, old fears trying to resurface, but she pushed them down. She wasn't that scared girl anymore. She was someone who'd fought armed men and won, someone who'd built a life from nothing. Dutch Holloway couldn't touch her anymore. The streets of Redemption Gulch were crowded when they arrived. Word had spread about the trial, and it seemed like half the territory had shown up to watch. Mara dismounted, feeling eyes on her from every direction. Some curious, some hostile, some sympathetic. She ignored them all and walked toward the courthouse with her head high. Rowan stayed close, a solid presence at her back. Thomas and Anna flanked them. The deputy led the way. Inside the courthouse, Dutch Holloway sat at the defendant's table with his expensive lawyer. He looked older than Mara remembered, his face red and puffy, his eyes mean. When he saw her, something ugly crossed his expression, but Mara just smiled. A cold, certain smile that said she wasn't afraid. And for the first time in her life, she truly wasn't. The trial was about to begin, and Mara Vance was ready to tell the truth. The judge was a hard-faced woman named Margaret Thorne, who'd been brought in from the territorial capital specifically for this trial. She had a reputation for not tolerating nonsense, which was probably why Sheriff Clayton had requested her. She banged her gavel once, and the crowded courtroom fell silent. "This court is now in session," Judge Thorne said. "The territory versus Dutch Holloway on charges of assault, extortion, and coercion. Prosecutor, call your first witness." The prosecutor, a thin man named Edmonds who looked too young for the job, stood up. "The territory calls Mara Vance." Mara rose from her seat, feeling every eye in the room track her movement. She walked to the witness stand, placed her hand on the Bible for the oath, and sat down. From here, she could see everything. The packed gallery, Dutch's red face, Rowan sitting in the front row with his arms crossed. His eyes met hers, and she drew strength from that look. "You've got this," it said. "Miss Vance," Edmonds began, "please tell the court about your relationship with the defendant." Mara took a breath. "Dutch Holloway held a debt that belonged to my father. When my father died, Dutch claimed I was responsible for paying it back." "And were you legally responsible?" "I don't know. Dutch said I was. The law seemed to agree with him." Her voice was steady, clearer than she'd expected. "The debt was $600. I had no way to pay it." "What did Mr. Holloway propose?" "He offered to forgive the debt if I came to work for him. At his house." "As what?" Mara looked directly at Dutch. His lawyer had told him to appear calm, but she could see the rage simmering underneath. "He said as a housekeeper, but the way he said it, the way he looked at me when he made the offer, I knew what he really meant." "Objection," Dutch's lawyer jumped up. "Speculation. The witness is interpreting looks and tone rather than stating facts." "Sustained," Judge Thorne said. "Miss Vance, stick to what was actually said and done." Mara nodded. "Dutch made the offer 3 times. Each time he'd find me alone, corner me somewhere private. He'd stand too close, touch my arm, my shoulder. Once he touched my face. She could feel her skin crawling at the memory. He'd talk about how I'd be comfortable in his house, how he'd take care of me, how grateful I should be for his generosity." "And how did you respond?" "I refused every time. Told him I'd find another way to pay the debt." "What happened when you refused?" "He got angry. Said I was being ungrateful, that I didn't understand how serious my situation was." Mara's hands clenched in her lap. "Then he told me if I wouldn't accept his help, he'd have to pursue other methods of collection." "Other methods being?" "The auction. He said if I wouldn't work off the debt privately, he'd make it public. Make an example of me." The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. Judge Thorne banged her gavel. "Order," Edmonds continued. "And did Mr. Holloway follow through with this threat?" "Yes. He held a public auction in the town square. Put me on a platform like livestock and tried to sell off my labor to the highest bidder. How did that make you feel? Objection, Dutch's lawyer said. Relevance. I'll allow it, Judge Thorne said. Answer the question, Miss Vance. Mara's voice dropped. It made me feel like I wasn't human anymore, like I was property to be bought and sold, like my father's mistakes had erased my right to dignity. Dutch's lawyer stood again. Your Honor, I'd like to remind the court that debt auctions, while distasteful, are legal in this territory. My client was well within his rights to— We'll address the legality of the auction later, Judge Thorne interrupted. Right now we're establishing facts. Continue, Mr. Edmonds. Edmonds asked more questions about the specific things Dutch had said during those private encounters, about witnesses who might have seen, about the conditions of the auction itself. Mara answered each one carefully, telling the truth without embellishment. Then it was time for cross-examination. Dutch's lawyer was a man named Pritchard, expensive suit and slicked back hair. He approached the witness stand with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Miss Vance, you've painted quite a picture of my client, a predator, essentially, a man who abuses his position for personal gratification. I've told the truth about what happened. The truth as you perceived it. Pritchard's smile widened. But perception isn't always reality, is it? For instance, you say, my client stood too close. How close is too close? Close enough that I could smell the whiskey on his breath. My client enjoys an occasional drink. That's hardly a crime. It is when you use it to intimidate someone who owes you money. Pritchard's smile slipped slightly. You also claim he touched you inappropriately. Yet by your own testimony, these touches were on your arm, your shoulder, your face. Hardly intimate areas. They were unwanted touches. That makes them inappropriate. Or perhaps you misinterpreted friendly gestures as something sinister because you were looking for a way out of a legitimate debt. Mara felt anger flash hot in her chest, but she kept her voice level. I wasn't looking for a way out. I was trying to maintain my dignity while a powerful man tried to leverage my poverty into something else. Something else being what exactly? You've been very vague about what you claim my client actually wanted. Because he was vague. That's how men like him operate. They don't make explicit demands, they imply. They suggest. They make you understand what they want without saying it outright, so later they can claim innocence. The courtroom erupted. Half the people were nodding, the other half shouting objections. Judge Thorne banged her gavel repeatedly. Order! I will have order or I'll clear this courtroom. Pritchard waited for the noise to die down, then changed tactics. Miss Vance, isn't it true that you're currently living with Rowan Cade, the man who bought your debt at the auction? I live on the Cade Ranch, yes. And what is the nature of your relationship with Mr. Cade? Mara felt her face heat, but she kept her chin up. We're partners. In the ranch and in life. Partners. Pritchard's tone made the word sound dirty. So the man who paid $600 for you is now your romantic partner. Convenient. Objection. Edmonds was on his feet. The witness's personal life is not on trial here. I'm establishing credibility, Pritchard argued. This witness claims my client made improper advances, yet she's currently in a relationship that began with her being purchased. It seems relevant to question whether she can objectively assess what constitutes appropriate behavior. Judge Thorne considered this. I'll allow it, but tread carefully, Mr. Pritchard. Pritchard turned back to Mara. Did Mr. Cade make any advances toward you? No. Never? In all these months of living together? He treated me with respect from the first day. And yet somehow you ended up in a romantic relationship. That doesn't just happen without someone making the first move. Mara looked him dead in the eye. The difference is choice. Rowan gave me a room of my own, space, freedom. He never demanded anything, never used his position to pressure me. When we got together, it was because we both wanted it. That's what your client never understood. The difference between coercion and consent. The courtroom went quiet. Even Pritchard seemed momentarily at a loss. No further questions, he said finally. Mara stepped down from the witness stand on shaking legs. She'd done it, told her truth in front of everyone. Dutch's face was purple with rage, but he couldn't touch her now. Rowan caught her hand as she sat down beside him. He didn't say anything, just squeezed once. It was enough. The prosecutor called other witnesses. Women who'd had similar experiences with Dutch, offers of debt forgiveness in exchange for favors, touches that lingered too long, comments that made their skin crawl. One by one, they stood up and told their stories. Dutch's lawyer tried to discredit each of them, called them liars, gold diggers, women with axes to grind. But the stories were too consistent, too detailed. The pattern was clear. Then came the Crenshaws. Mrs. Crenshaw testified about the men who'd come to their store, sent by Dutch, to collect a debt. How they'd destroyed inventory, threatened violence, beaten her son when he tried to stop them. Her son, still bandaged and bruised, confirmed the story. Said he'd recognized one of the men as Dutch's foreman, that they'd specifically mentioned Dutch's name, said they were following his orders. By the time the prosecution rested, the case was damning, but Dutch still had his defense. Pritchard called character witnesses, businessmen who spoke about Dutch's generosity, his contributions to the town, his reputation as a fair lender. It was all carefully choreographed, designed to paint Dutch as a pillar of the community being torn down by vindictive women and business rivals. Then Dutch himself took the stand. He denied everything, said the women had misinterpreted his kindness, that he'd never touched anyone inappropriately, never made improper suggestions, that the auction had been a legal method of debt collection, nothing more. "I'm a businessman," Dutch said, his voice smooth and practiced. "I lend money to people who need it. Sometimes they can't pay back. That's the risk I take. But I've never used that position for anything except legitimate business." Edmonds cross-examined him, but Dutch was slippery. He had an answer for everything, an explanation that sounded just reasonable enough to create doubt. The trial lasted 2 days. On the third morning, closing arguments began. Pritchard went first, painting Dutch as a victim of mass hysteria. Women scorned, business rivals jealous, all conspiring to destroy a good man's reputation. Then Edmonds stood. He was young, but when he spoke, his voice carried conviction. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is simple. It's about power and how it's used. Dutch Holloway has power in this town. Money, influence, connections. And he's used that power to intimidate, coerce, and harm people who couldn't fight back. The defense wants you to believe this is all coincidence, that multiple women independently misunderstood his intentions, that the attack on the Crenshaws was carried out by his men without his knowledge, that Mara Vance somehow imagined the predatory behavior that led to her public humiliation. But ask yourself, what's more likely? That all these people are lying, or that one man, drunk on his own power, finally got caught? The law exists to protect the vulnerable from the powerful. That's its entire purpose. If we don't hold Dutch Holloway accountable, we're saying that power is its own justification. That if you're rich enough, connected enough, you can do whatever you want to whoever you want. I don't believe that's the kind of territory we want to live in, and I don't think you do either." He sat down. The courtroom was silent. Judge Thorne gave the jury their instructions and sent them to deliberate. Then there was nothing to do but wait. Mara stood outside the courthouse, breathing fresh air, trying to calm her racing heart. Rowan stood beside her, solid and steady. "You did good in there," he said. "I just told the truth." That's harder than it sounds, especially when someone's trying to twist it into lies. Thomas and Anna joined them, both looking drained. "How long do you think they'll deliberate?" Anna asked. "Could be hours. Could be days." Rowan looked at the sky. "No point standing here waiting. Let's get something to eat." They walked to the hotel restaurant, but Mara couldn't eat much. Her stomach was tied in knots, her mind replaying every moment of her testimony, wondering if she'd said enough, if the jury had believed her. They were finishing their meal when a boy ran into the restaurant. "Jury's back. They've reached a verdict." The walk back to the courthouse felt like a mile, even though it was only a block. The courtroom was packed again, everyone wanting to see how this would end. Judge Thorne entered and took her seat. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreman stood. "We have, Your Honor." "What say you?" "On the charge of assault, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of extortion, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of coercion, we find the defendant guilty." The courtroom exploded. People shouting, some in triumph, some in anger. Dutch's face went from red to white. His lawyer was already standing, objecting, demanding appeals. Judge Thorne banged her gavel until order was restored. "Mr. Holloway, stand up." Dutch stood, his legs visibly shaking. "You've been found guilty on all counts, Before I pass sentence, do you have anything to say? Dutch's mouth worked for a moment. Then he turned and looked directly at Mara. This isn't over. You think you've won, but that's enough, Judge Thorne snapped. Dutch Holloway, I hereby sentence you to 10 years in the territorial prison. Additionally, all debts currently held by your office are hereby voided and erased. You are prohibited from engaging in lending or debt collection in this territory ever again. Bailiff, take him into custody. Dutch started shouting as the bailiff approached, but his words were lost in the roar of the crowd. Some people were cheering, others sat in stunned silence. The Crenshaw family was crying with relief. Mara felt Rowan's arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. She leaned into him, suddenly exhausted. It's over, she said. It's over, Rowan confirmed. They watched as Dutch was led away in chains, still shouting, still denying, but it didn't matter anymore. Justice had been served. The man who'd terrorized so many people for so long was finally being held accountable. Outside the courthouse, people approached Mara, some to thank her, some to share their own stories of Dutch's abuse. Mrs. Chen from the general store hugged her, tears in her eyes. You were so brave, she said. Thank you for speaking up. I should have done it sooner, Mara said. You did it when you could. That's what matters. Sheriff Clayton appeared, looking satisfied. Good work today, all of you? He glanced at the Webbers. I heard you folks are headed to Silver Creek? That was the plan, Thomas said. Though we've been away so long, I don't know if that job still exists. Might have something better, Clayton said. Town needs a new constable. Someone honest, someone who's not afraid to stand up for what's right. Job comes with a house and steady pay. Interested? Thomas and Anna looked at each other, hope blooming on their faces. Seriously? Seriously, think about it. Let me know in a few days. After Clayton left, Thomas turned to Rowan and Mara. I don't know how to thank you for everything. You saved our lives, gave us shelter, stood beside us through all this. You don't need to thank us, Rowan said. We helped each other. That's what people should do. Will you stay in Redemption Gulch? Mara asked. If Thomas takes the constable job? I think we might, Anna said slowly. It's not the town we thought it was. With Dutch gone, maybe it can be better. Maybe we can help make it better. They said their goodbyes with promises to visit, to stay in touch. Then Rowan and Mara mounted their horses and started the ride home. The sun was setting as they crested the last hill and saw the ranch spread out below them. It looked different now. Not just a place to hide or survive, but a real home. The garden plots were ready for spring planting. The barn stood solid and strong. Smoke rose from the chimney, though they'd banked the fire before leaving. Someone's here, Rowan said, his hand moving toward his rifle. They approached cautiously. A wagon sat in front of the house, and as they got closer, Mara recognized it. The traveling merchant who'd warned them about the Hendry gang. He was sitting on their porch, drinking coffee like he owned the place. Afternoon, he called out cheerfully. Hope you don't mind. Found your door unlocked and helped myself to some coffee. Been waiting a few hours. What do you want? Rowan asked, not quite friendly but not hostile either. To deliver a message. And a package. The merchant gestured to a large crate beside him. This came for you. From Kansas. Rowan's face went pale. From Kansas? Yep, legal office. Said it's been trying to find you for 2 years. The merchant handed over an envelope. They hired me to track you down. That's what I do. Find people who don't want to be found. Though I got to say you made it easy once I heard about that shootout with the Hendry gang. Rowan took the envelope with shaking hands. He stared at it for a long moment before finally opening it. Mara watched his face as he read, saw shock, then confusion, then something that might have been grief mixed with relief. What is it? She asked gently. My wife's family. They've been looking for me. Wanted to make sure I was all right. His voice was rough. They also wanted me to have some things. Sarah's things. Family heirlooms they thought I should keep. He knelt and opened the crate. Inside were photograph albums, jewelry boxes, letters tied with ribbon. Sarah's wedding dress, carefully preserved, a child's drawings, obviously Emily's work, and at the bottom, a letter in Sarah's handwriting. Rowan picked it up with trembling fingers. She wrote this before she died. Her mother had it all these years. Do you want privacy? Mara asked. No, stay. He opened the letter and read aloud, his voice breaking on the words. My darling Rowan, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. I'm writing this because we both know the world is dangerous and tomorrow isn't promised. I need you to know some things. First, loving you was the best decision I ever made. You were stubborn and difficult and absolutely impossible sometimes, but you were mine and I was yours, and that was everything. Second, Emily is so much like you, stubborn, brave, curious. She's going to do amazing things. I know you'll protect her and guide her and give her the world. But here's the most important thing, the thing I need you to promise me. If something happens to me, to us, don't let it destroy you. Don't spend the rest of your life punishing yourself for things you couldn't control. Live, Rowan. Really live. Find joy again. Love again. I won't be waiting in heaven angry that you moved on. I'll be proud that you found a way forward. Promise me you'll try. All my love, always, Sarah. The silence after he finished was absolute. Tears streamed down Rowan's face, the first Mara had ever seen him shed. She knew, he whispered. She knew I'd blame myself, that I'd stop living. Mara put her arms around him, and he collapsed into her embrace, finally grieving the way he'd needed to for 3 years. Not with nightmares and work and desperate attempts to outrun his pain, but with honest tears and the acceptance that what happened wasn't his fault. The merchant quietly excused himself, climbed into his wagon, and left. Mara barely noticed. She just held Rowan while he cried, while the weight he'd been carrying finally became light enough to put down. When the tears finally stopped, Rowan pulled back and looked at her with red, swollen eyes. She'd like you, Sarah. She really would. I wish I could have known her. She was right, though, about everything. I have been punishing myself, refusing to live because I thought I didn't deserve to. He took a shaky breath. But I'm done with that now. Sarah wanted me to live. Emily would want me to live. And I want to live. With you. Here. Building something good. Then that's what we'll do. They spent the evening going through the crate together. Mara looked at photographs of Sarah and Emily, heard stories about them, learned who they'd been beyond the tragedy of how they died. It was painful but necessary, honoring the past without being imprisoned by it. The next morning, Rowan built a small memorial behind the house. He buried the letter there, along with a photograph of his family. This way they're always here, he explained. Part of the ranch. Part of our home. That's beautiful, Mara said. They stood together looking at the small stone marker Rowan had made. It was simple, just their names and dates. But it was enough. I love you, Rowan said, not looking at her. I need you to know that. This isn't about replacing Sarah or forgetting Emily. It's about making room in my heart for new love alongside the old. You taught me that was possible. You taught me that I was worth loving, Mara replied. That I wasn't just defined by my poverty or my father's mistakes or Dutch Holloway's cruelty. You saw something in me worth saving. You saved yourself. I just gave you the space to do it. They walked back to the house hand in hand. Spring was coming in earnest now. Green shoots pushing up through the soil, birds returning from their winter journeys, the world renewing itself the way it did every year. That afternoon, Rowan surprised her by pulling out the reward money they'd received for the information about the Hendry gang. He'd kept it separate, not touching it. I've been thinking, he said, about what to do with this. And? The ranch is doing well. We don't need it for survival anymore, so I thought maybe we use it for something that matters. He looked at her seriously. What if we helped other people in situations like you were in? People trapped by debt they can't pay, being exploited by men like Dutch. Mara felt warmth spread through her chest. You mean like a fund to pay off debts for people who can't? Exactly. We could work with Sheriff Clayton, identify people who genuinely need help. Give them a fresh start the way you got one. The way we both got one, Mara corrected. I think it's perfect. Sarah and Emily would approve too. Yeah, I think they would. They spent the next weeks planning how to structure the fund, who to trust with administration, how to make sure the money went to people who truly needed it, and not grifters looking for easy cash. Word spread quickly. Within a month, they'd helped 3 families escape predatory debt situations. By summer, it was 8. People started calling it the Vance Cade Fund, though Rowan argued they should name it after Sarah instead. She'd tell you to stop being ridiculous, Mara said. She'd say to use it to help people, not memorialize her. You're probably right. The ranch thrived. They bought more cattle, expanded the garden, repaired the last of the lingering damage from the Hendry attack. Thomas and Anna visited regularly, bringing news from Redemption Gulch. The town was changing, they said. With Dutch gone, people were more willing to stand up for themselves. Businesses were thriving. The atmosphere was lighter. On a warm evening in late summer, Rowan and Mara sat on the porch watching the sunset. It had become their ritual, ending each day together, talking about what had happened, making plans for tomorrow. "I've been thinking," Rowan said, "about making this official." "Making what official?" He turned to face her fully. "Us. This partnership. I know we don't need a piece of paper to prove what we have, but I want it anyway. Want to stand up in front of people and say you're my wife, that I choose you, that this is forever." Mara's heart stuttered. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "I am, if you'll have me. A broken-down rancher with nightmares and a past full of tragedy. Only if you'll have me. A stubborn woman with trust issues and a tendency to pick fights." Rowan laughed, and the sound was full of genuine joy. "I'll take my chances." "Then yes, I'll marry you." He kissed her as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. It felt like a promise that even after darkness, there was always another dawn. They were married in the fall, in a small ceremony at the ranch. Sheriff Clayton officiated. Thomas and Anna stood as witnesses. People from Redemption Gulch came, the ones who'd found their courage thanks to Mara's testimony. Mrs. Chen brought a cake. The Crenshaws brought flowers from their garden. It wasn't fancy, but it was real and honest and full of love. As Mara stood beside Rowan, saying vows that promised forever, she thought about that girl on the auction platform, the one who'd been so certain her life was over, who'd felt like nothing more than a burden to be bought and sold. She'd been wrong. Her life hadn't ended that day. It had begun. Sometimes the worst moments were doorways to better things. Sometimes losing everything made space for something new. Sometimes the people you thought were saving you were actually the ones you saved. The years that followed weren't perfect. There were hard winters and dry summers. Cattle died, crops failed. Rowan still had nightmares occasionally, though they grew less frequent. Mara still struggled with moments of doubt, wondering if she deserved the happiness she'd found. But they faced it all together, built a life that was honest and good, helped others the way they'd been helped, created something meaningful from the ashes of their tragedies. 5 years after that first auction, Mara stood in the same town square in Redemption Gulch. But this time, she wasn't on a platform being sold. She was announcing the opening of a new community center, funded by the Vance Foundation, dedicated to helping people escape debt and exploitation. Dutch Holloway was still in prison, would be for years yet, and every person he'd hurt had found a way forward. That was justice. Not perfect, not complete, but real. After the ceremony, Mara and Rowan rode back to the ranch. It was late autumn now, the air crisp and clean. The ranch had grown. They employed 2 hands now to help with the work, and there was talk of expanding further. But the core of it remained the same, a home built by 2 broken people who'd learned to heal together. "You ever regret it?" Rowan asked as they unsaddled the horses. "Staying here instead of running when you had the chance?" Mara thought about it seriously. "No, never. You? Not once." He pulled her close. "Best $600 I ever spent." She laughed and kissed him. "You better not let anyone hear you say that. They'll think you actually bought me." "I didn't buy you. I bought your freedom. You gave yourself to me. There's a difference." "Smart man." "I have my moments." They walked into the house together as the sun set behind them. Inside there was warmth and light and the promise of tomorrow. Outside the land stretched on forever, harsh and beautiful and unforgiving. But they'd learned to thrive in harsh places, learned that beauty could grow in the most unlikely soil, learned that forgiveness of others and yourself was possible even when it seemed impossible. Mara Vance had started her journey as a victim, someone things happened to. She'd ended it as a survivor, someone who made things happen. And in between, she'd discovered that the worst day of your life could become the catalyst for the best parts. You just had to be brave enough to walk through the fire and see what waited on the other side. As Mara lay in bed that night, Rowan's arm around her, listening to his steady breathing, she thought about all the things she'd learned. about strength and resilience, about how trauma doesn't have to define you, about how love can heal even the deepest wounds if you let it. She'd learned that justice matters, that speaking up matters, that standing up to power is terrifying but necessary. She'd learned that you can't outrun grief, but you can make room for it alongside joy, that the past doesn't have to dictate the future, that second chances are real if you're brave enough to take them. Most importantly, she'd learned that she was enough, not despite her poverty or her size or her difficult personality, but because of who she was at her core: a fighter, a survivor, someone worthy of love and respect and happiness. The ranch was quiet now, settled into its foundations for the night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new work, new opportunities to build something meaningful. But tonight, Mara Vance Cade simply existed in the peace she'd fought so hard to find. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.